I thought I was alone in those woods. No nearby campsites, no trails anyone actually used. Just me, my fire, and the quiet. But when the music started playing in the darkness, the same song over and over, I realized someone had been there before me, and they were still close enough to hear me breathe. This happened back in 2016, but I remember every detail of that night as if it just happened. There's a stretch of forest just south of the town I live in. I go out there pretty often, 4 or 5 times a year at least. It's one of those places that feels forgotten. No crowds, no families, no hikers passing you by every 10 minutes. Just trees, silence, space to think. That weekend, I had one of those urges you can't really explain. I just wanted to get away from everything for a night or two. No phone, no people, just me and the woods. So I packed a backpack, drove down to my usual spot, and parked along the road near the tree line. I don't even know if what I followed was an official trail. It wasn't marked on any maps I'd seen, and I'd never once run into another camper out there, but I knew the path well enough. I hiked for about 2 hours before I reached the clearing I like to use as a campsite. The forest there wasn't mountainous. It was flat, dense, and quiet. The kind of place that feels safe during the day and completely different at night. I had a few hours before sunset, so I took my time setting everything up, got my tent right, built a small fire, sat there eating trail mix, listening to birds and the crackle of the wood. As the sun dipped lower, the forest changed fast. 1 minute, it was alive with sound. The next, it was almost silent. I sat by the fire for about 25 minutes after dark, just listening to how empty everything suddenly felt. That's when I heard it. Music. At first, I thought my brain was filling in sounds, but no, it was real. Faint, distant music drifting through the trees. It sounded like old classical music. The kind you'd expect to hear coming from a dusty record player in a forgotten house. I stood up and tried to pinpoint where it was coming from. Another campsite, maybe. Someone playing music way too loud. It didn't make sense. I'd never seen anyone else out here. Still, I stayed put and listened. The weird part? The song never changed. It just kept looping. The same piece, over and over again, filling the quiet woods. After about 30 minutes of listening to it, I realized something felt wrong. Not loud party wrong, not careless camper wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't explain. So I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the sound. I told myself I'd just get close enough to confirm it was nothing weird. That way I could actually relax and sleep. But the closer I got, the worse the feeling in my chest became. My heart started beating faster. My skin felt tight, like I had goosebumps crawling up my arms. And that's when it hit me. I'd only brought my flashlight. No knife, no pepper spray, nothing. I hadn't even thought about it. By the time the music was loud enough to sound like it was right in front of me, I still couldn't see any light. No campfire, no lantern, no tent. And then I saw it. A large speaker, just sitting there, propped up behind a tree. No people, no bags, no campsite. Just an old bulky speaker with a faded display and worn buttons, like something from the early 2000s. I swept my flashlight around in every direction. Nothing, no movement, no footsteps, no voices. I walked up to the speaker, my heart hammering in my ears, and pressed the power button. The music stopped instantly. The silence that followed was so sudden it felt heavy, like the forest had been holding its breath the entire time and finally let it out. I didn't wait around. I turned and headed straight back to my campsite, feeling weirdly relieved when I saw my fire again. The warm glow felt like safety, like I'd crossed back into my own space. But the feeling didn't go away. Something still felt wrong. That's when I noticed what was missing. My matches, my cooking utensils, my knife, my pepper spray, all gone. Someone had been in my campsite while I was gone. My body went cold. I didn't even finish packing properly. I just threw what I could into my bag, heart racing, hands shaking. And that's when the music started again. This time, it was closer, much closer. It wasn't coming from the same direction anymore. I ran. I sprinted out of the campsite and down the trail, not caring how loud I was, not caring about tripping over roots. The music faded behind me as I ran, and for a second, I actually felt a tiny bit of relief. Then I saw something lying on the path ahead. My things, all of them, laid out neatly in the middle of the trail. The knife, the pepper spray, the utensils, everything that had gone missing, perfectly lined up, like someone wanted me to find them. Before I could even take a step closer, I heard footsteps explode behind me. Fast, heavy, rushing straight toward me. I didn't look back. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life. I didn't stop until I reached the road. I didn't slow down until I was in my car, slamming the door shut and locking it with shaking hands. I still don't know what I ran from that night, but whatever it wasn't trying to scare me away. It felt like it was playing with me, and I barely got out. Next story. I used to think solo camping was peaceful. Quiet trails, cold air, nothing but trees and your own thoughts. That night in Alaska taught me how wrong I was, because the man who found my campsite didn't get lost by accident, and the cabin he was looking for was never meant to be found. This happened back in 2016, but I still remember every second of it like it happened yesterday. I go camping in the woods south of my town pretty often, 4 or 5 times a year at least. It helps clear my head. That weekend, I felt restless and just needed to be alone. So I packed my backpack and drove out to my favorite spot. I don't even know if the trail I took was officially marked on any map. Nobody ever seemed to use it. I parked my car on the side of the road near the tree line and hiked for about 2 hours until I reached a small clearing where I usually camped. The forest out there was flat and dense. No mountains, no cliffs, just endless trees in every direction. It was perfect for a short solo trip, quiet, boring in a calming way. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and relaxed. The afternoon passed slowly. Birds chirped. The air smelled like pine and smoke. Everything felt normal. Then, just past noon, I heard footsteps. I looked up, startled. A man stood at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't seen or heard a single person in the 2 days I'd been out there. No hikers, no campers, not even wildlife. The fact that he seemed to appear out of nowhere made my skin crawl. He looked like a normal camper. Backpack, outdoor gear, mid-30s maybe. He didn't smile, but he didn't look threatening either. He asked me if I knew where the cabin was. I hadn't been to any cabin myself, but I knew what he meant. Some of the trails out there have small public shelters, basically run-down wooden cabins hikers can use if they get stuck overnight. They're first come, first served, and barely maintained. During my time at the campsite, I'd noticed a narrow, barely visible trail leading deeper into the woods. I told him that if there was a shelter out here, it was probably down that path. He thanked me and walked off. That should have been the end of it. I went back to my fire and tried to relax, but the encounter stuck in my head. Something about the way he'd shown up without making a sound felt wrong. Hours passed. By the time evening came, the forest felt different. In Alaska, the sun doesn't fully set during certain parts of the year. It hovered near the horizon, casting long shadows between the trees. The world felt dim, but not dark. That's when I saw someone walking out of the woods toward my campsite. It was him again. My stomach tightened. He explained that he couldn't find the shelter. Then he corrected himself, saying he never even found the trail I'd mentioned. He asked if I could show him the way. That's when the red flags really started going up. If the trail was exactly where I said it was, how did he miss it? And why was he coming back hours later? I tried to explain again, pointing in the direction of the path, but he insisted I walk with him. Then he told me he didn't have a tent, that he was relying on the shelter for the night. I didn't want to go. Everything in my gut told me not to follow this stranger into the woods, but I also didn't want to be the person who left someone stranded. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my bag and told him I'd show him where the trail started. We walked in silence. No small talk, no friendly chatter, just the sound of our footsteps crunching through leaves and dirt. After about 10 minutes, I saw the path exactly where I remembered it, and beyond the trail, I could see the cabin. Not clearly, but enough to know it was there. I stopped and pointed it out. There was no way he could have missed it before. The path wasn't hidden. The shelter wasn't invisible. We walked closer. That's when he said something that made my blood run cold. "This isn't the right one." I didn't understand what he meant. The cabin was right there. Broken windows, rotting wood. It looked abandoned, but it was clearly the shelter he had been asking about. As I was staring at it, trying to process his words, I realized he'd stopped walking. I turned around. He stood about 10 feet behind me. He was holding a knife. His face was empty. No anger, no panic, just a dead, flat stare. In a calm, emotionless voice, he told me to go inside the cabin. My mind went blank for a second. I asked him what the hell he was doing, why he had a knife. He didn't answer. He just repeated himself. "Go inside." I felt rage and terror crash into each other inside my chest. I'd tried to help him. I'd walked him all this way. And now he was standing there, pointing a knife at me like I was prey. I knew one thing for sure. Going into that cabin meant I wasn't coming back out. There was still some distance between us. I dropped my backpack and ran. I expected to hear him chasing me, but he didn't. When I finally looked back, he was still standing there, watching me disappear into the trees. I hid in the forest for about half an hour, barely breathing, listening for footsteps. Nothing. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I crept back toward the cabin. The man was gone. So was my bag, my phone, wallet, keys, everything. I felt sick. I slowly made my way back toward my campsite, heart pounding. That's when I saw it. My campfire was burning bright. It should have burned out by now. My tent was still there. The clearing looked exactly the same. And in the middle of my campsite was my backpack. It sat there, placed neatly by the fire. This was a trap. I knew it was. I stood frozen, staring at my own belongings, trying to decide if I was desperate enough to run in and grab them. Then the man stepped out of the darkness behind the fire. He calmly added more sticks to the flames. Then he sat down, humming to himself, like he'd been waiting. I didn't think. I turned and ran. I ran until I found the main trail. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they were on fire. I hiked through the night until I reached the road and eventually flagged down a passing car. Police and rangers searched the area the next morning. They found nothing. No campsite, no cabin, no bag. Even the stones from my fire pit had been scattered into the forest, like I was never there. I don't know what that man wanted, but I know one thing. I was one bad decision away from never leaving those woods. Next story. I thought the scariest part of hiking alone was getting lost, running out of food, maybe seeing a bear. I didn't expect the real danger to smile at me, offer me food, and follow me into the woods. This happened just 2 weeks ago, on the first backpacking trip of the summer for me. As far as I knew, it was supposed to be a completely routine hike. The trail ran through northeastern Wyoming, a 4-day route in total. 2 days in, 2 days back out the same way. I'd done plenty of trails like this before. Long stretches of quiet forest, empty campsites, nothing out of the ordinary. I parked at the empty trailhead and started walking. The first few hours went smoothly. The trail was quiet, the weather was decent, and I felt like I was making good time. By the early afternoon, I had about 3 miles left before reaching the first campsite. I wasn't planning to stay there. I was going to pass through and hike another 2 miles to the next site, where I planned to camp for the night. I stopped for a quick break, just long enough to sit against a tree, pull out a snack, and catch my breath. I wasn't even planning on resting long. I just wanted to eat and keep moving. That's when I noticed him. On the opposite side of the trail, partially hidden among the trees, there was a man standing still. Not walking, not moving, just standing there, staring directly at me. I froze. I had no idea how long he'd been there. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no branches snapping, no rustling leaves. It was like he'd simply appeared in the woods the moment I looked up. As soon as our eyes met, he raised his hand and gave me a wave. Not a normal wave. It was slow, stiff, almost mechanical, like he was trying to imitate what a friendly gesture looked like, but didn't quite understand how to do it. It made my skin crawl. I stood up immediately, shouldered my backpack, and continued down the trail. I told myself he was probably just another hiker who'd stepped off the path to take a break. But the way he'd been watching me, the way he'd waved, something about it felt wrong. The next few miles were harder than I expected. The terrain was rougher, and I was more tired than I thought. It took me almost 2 hours to reach the first campsite. Since I'd cut my break short earlier, I decided to use this spot to make a proper meal before continuing on to the next site. I dropped my pack, pulled out my small propane cooker, and started boiling water for my freeze-dried food. While I was waiting for it to cook, I heard footsteps coming down the trail. My stomach tightened. I already knew who it was before I turned around. It was the same man from the woods. Now that he was closer, I could see him more clearly. Short black hair, a medium-length beard, gray flannel shirt, blue jeans. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Just normal enough that he didn't immediately stand out. But the smile on his face didn't match his eyes. It looked like he was trying to appear friendly, but there was something empty behind it. Like the expression was stuck on his face instead of actually coming from him. He greeted me and started making small talk. Asked how the hike was going, how long I'd been out here, where I was headed. I gave short answers, hoping he'd take the hint and move along. He didn't. Instead, he walked right up and sat down next to me, way too close. The way he acted felt aggressively friendly, like he was forcing conversation, forcing familiarity, forcing himself into my space. The longer he talked, the more uncomfortable I felt. He asked about my food, then joked about it, calling it a homeless meal and saying I needed better nutrition. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a protein bar. The wrapper was already open. No bites taken, just opened. He tried to hand it to me. I refused. He insisted. I refused again. After a moment, he finally backed off, chuckling and saying he'd give it to me later when I was really hungry. Then he casually mentioned that he'd be staying at this campsite for the night. The relief hit me instantly. Good. That meant I could leave. I finished eating as quickly as I could, my appetite completely gone. I told him I had a friend waiting for me at the next campsite and that I couldn't stay long. It was a lie, but I didn't care. I just wanted an excuse to leave without escalating anything. He kept that same fixed smile on his face as I stood up and shouldered my pack. The smile didn't reach his eyes. His face went strangely flat, like someone had turned off whatever emotion he was pretending to show. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The forest around us felt unnaturally quiet, like even the wind had paused to listen. Then I turned and walked back onto the trail. I checked over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see him following me. Each time, he was still sitting there by the campsite, watching me disappear between the trees. I tried to tell myself that was the end of it. Maybe he was just awkward. Maybe I'd misread the whole situation. Maybe I was just on edge because I was alone in the woods. But my gut didn't agree. Another couple of hours passed before I reached the campsite where I actually planned to stay the night. By the time I arrived, the sun was already sinking low, staining the sky in dull orange light. Shadows stretched long between the trees, and the forest was starting to feel heavier, more closed in. I dropped my pack, but something told me not to fully unpack yet. It was just a feeling, a quiet instinct in the back of my mind telling me to keep things ready, just in case I needed to leave quickly. I hadn't even started setting up my tent when I heard footsteps on the trail behind me. My stomach dropped. A moment later, he stepped into view. The same man, the same gray flannel, the same beard. The same unnatural smile. He stood there like he'd been expecting to find me. I felt anger flash through me, sharp and sudden, cutting through the fear. I'd gone out of my way to leave him behind. He'd told me he was staying at the previous campsite. So what the hell was he doing here? I asked him directly if he was following me. I didn't bother hiding the edge in my voice. He laughed, not nervously, not awkwardly. He laughed like it was a joke between friends. "Yeah," he said, "I'm following you." The way he said it made my skin crawl, like he wanted to see my reaction, like he was enjoying how uncomfortable I looked. Then he asked if I was hungry after all that walking. I didn't answer him. I grabbed my pack and started walking back down the trail, the same direction I'd come from. I didn't look back right away, but every nerve in my body was screaming that he was still there, watching, waiting. I passed the previous campsite, exhausted, my legs burning, but I kept going. I didn't stop until I physically couldn't push myself any further. Eventually, I stepped off the trail and moved deeper into the woods. I didn't know how far I went, maybe a couple 100 feet, but far enough that I couldn't see the path anymore. I set up my tent quickly, quietly. I left most of my gear inside my backpack instead of unpacking it. If I had to run, I wanted to be able to grab everything in one motion. I crawled into the tent and forced myself to lie still. The forest was dark now, and silent. Despite everything, exhaustion eventually dragged me under. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps, crunching leaves, slow, deliberate. They were coming from the direction of the trail. My heart started hammering in my chest. I lay there, barely breathing, listening. The footsteps moved closer, then slowed, then paused. I imagined him standing there in the darkness, scanning the trees, trying to spot my tent. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved on, fading back down the trail, disappearing into the forest. He didn't find me. I didn't sleep again after that. I waited for the sky to lighten, for the faint gray of early morning to bleed through the trees. As soon as there was enough light to see where I was going, I packed up and started hiking back toward my car. I didn't stop. I didn't take breaks. I didn't look back.